Ford built the car that put America on wheels. General Motors built the credit machine that let America buy the dream before it could afford it. And that quiet invention changed industrial power more deeply than any chrome showroom ever admitted. In the early years of the motor age, Henry Ford looked almost impossible to beat. His Model T was not just a car, it was a symbol of industrial discipline. Ford had taken something once reserved for the wealthy and pushed it toward the ordinary worker with ruthless focus. One model, one system, one vast machine built to drive costs down until the car became a fact of American life. I'm Walt, and this is the strange part. Ford's genius was real. His factory logic was revolutionary. But the company that understood the next phase of American desire was not Ford. It was General Motors. And its weapon was not only engineering, it was finance. By the 1920s, the first great wave of car ownership had already changed the country. Roads stretched outward. Suburbs began to make more sense. A car was no longer a rich man's toy. It was freedom, status, movement, and proof that the modern century had arrived. But once the basic miracle had been delivered, a colder question appeared. How do you keep selling cars to people who already have one? Ford's answer was still discipline. The Model T remained simple, reliable, and famously affordable. It came from a system built for repetition, not variety. Ford wanted to perfect the machine and reduce the price, but Alfred Sloan at General Motors saw a different America emerging. He saw customers beginning to want choice, color, status, a ladder of aspiration, Chevrolet for one buyer, Buick for another, Cadillac for the man who wanted the world to know he had arrived. GM did not only sell transportation, it sold progression. That was dangerous enough. But the deeper strike came from credit. In 1919, General Motors created the General Motors Acceptance Corporation, known as GMAC. On the surface, it was a financing arm. In practice, it was a demand engine. It allowed dealers to finance inventory, and more importantly, helped customers buy cars on installment plans. Instead of waiting years to save the full price, a buyer could put money down and pay the rest over time. That sounds ordinary now. At the time, it changed the battlefield. Ford had mastered production. GM was learning to master the purchase itself. The sale was no longer limited by the cash in the customer's pocket on the day they walked into the showroom. Financing stretched desire across time. It took tomorrow's wages and made them useful today. It turned a car from a distant goal into a monthly obligation, wrapped in leather, steel, and social promise. Imagine a family standing outside a dealership window in the 1920s. They may not have the cash to buy outright, but they have wages, they have ambition, they have neighbors watching. They have a belief that next month will look much like this month. GMAC turned that belief into buying power. Ford was suspicious of consumer credit for years. He preferred the older ideal. Save first, buy later. There was a stern dignity to that view, but business history is not governed by dignity alone. It is governed by adoption. GM discovered that many customers did not want the most disciplined path to ownership. They wanted access, and access, once financed, becomes addictive. The mechanics were elegant. GM could offer different brands at different price levels, so customers could climb within the family rather than leave it. Annual model changes gave the buyer a reason to desire something newer, even when the old car still worked. Dealers could move more inventory because finance reduced the cash barrier. GMAC earned money by supporting the flow of sales. The whole structure linked manufacturing, retail, consumer psychology, and credit into one machine. This was not simply selling more cars, it was engineering demand. The old industrial question had been, how cheaply can we make the product? GM added another question, how easily can we make the customer say yes? That is where the fight with Ford became brutal. Ford's system was brilliant when the market wanted affordability above all else. But as incomes rose and consumer culture sharpened, the buyer began to want identity. The Model T started to feel less like a miracle and more like yesterday's compromise. GM's product ladder gave people a way to move up without changing the basic habit of buying from General Motors. In a sense, Sloan built a social staircase, and GMAC financed the climb. Ford eventually had to respond. The Model T was discontinued in 1927, and Ford introduced the Model A. But the pause had cost him. GM had not merely attacked Ford's car, it had attacked Ford's assumptions. It understood that a mature market does not behave like an early market. Once the product has spread, the battle moves from access to replacement, from necessity to preference, from price to psychology. There is a dangerous lesson inside that shift, though not the comfortable sort. A company can win the first war so convincingly that it fails to notice the second one beginning. Ford had solved production for the masses. GM solved consumption for the modern age. The showroom became a theater of future income. Chrome, paint, upholstery, brochures, salesmen, finance forms, and monthly payments all worked together. The customer did not just compare engines, they compared versions of themselves. The question was no longer only, can I afford a car? It became, what kind of car should a person like me be driving? Credit made that question profitable. Of course, credit also introduced risk. Borrowing against the future is harmless only when the future arrives as expected. Installment buying tied consumer confidence to industrial sales in a new way. If wages held, the machine looked brilliant. If fear spread, the same obligations could become a burden. But in the 1920s, with jazz-age confidence in the air, the machine felt almost unstoppable. GM was not alone in using consumer finance, and installment credit was spreading across American life. Radios, appliances, furniture, and cars all became part of a wider culture of buying now and paying later. But GM placed finance at the heart of a corporate strategy that matched product segmentation, dealer economics, and consumer desire. That combination made it especially powerful. The brilliance was that financing did not look like the product. The product had wheels, paint, and an engine. The real power sat in the paperwork. The credit contract made the vehicle easier to buy, the dealer easier to supply, and the manufacturer easier to scale. It joined separate decisions into one smooth transaction. That is the kind of advantage competitors often misunderstand. They look at the visible object and miss the invisible system that sells it. Ford's empire had been built around the factory. GM's empire increasingly depended on the customer journey from desire to signature. Ford had assembly lines, GM had a ladder, a portfolio, a finance arm, and a rhythm of planned novelty. One company was optimizing the product. The other was optimizing the purchase. By the end of the 1920s, GM had overtaken Ford in market leadership. That did not mean Ford was finished, far from it. But the center of gravity had shifted. The greatest car company was no longer simply the one that could produce the cheapest reliable vehicle. It was the one that could shape demand, finance aspiration, and keep customers moving through its system. Demand can look natural from the outside. It rarely is. It is often designed, built with pricing, credit, timing, status, distribution, and habit. GM understood that desire becomes far more valuable when it has a payment plan attached to it. The strategic post-mortem is almost uncomfortably modern. Financing is often the hidden product behind the visible product. The car gets photographed, the monthly payment closes the sale. The brand creates longing. The credit structure makes longing executable. Once a company controls that bridge, it is no longer waiting for demand. It is manufacturing the conditions under which demand can appear. That is why the GM and Ford rivalry still matters. It was not just a fight between two car companies. It was a fight between two models of capitalism. One trusted production purity. The other understood finance desire. One believed the machine should make the product cheaper. The other realized the financial machine could make the customer larger. And once that happened, industrial America changed. The car was no longer only something built in a factory. It became something built in the mind, sold in the showroom, and paid for by the future. Thank you for watching. If this story gave you a sharper view of credit, consumer demand, and corporate strategy, like the video and subscribe to InkedGold for more high-stakes business and financial documentaries. I appreciate you being here, and I will see you in the next video. Before you go, do you think the real product in modern business is still what companies sell, or the financing system that makes people buy it?